Welcome to footballgameplan.com, where football makes sense. I'm Emery Hunt, the czar of the playbook, and now that all of the film has been watched and the grades are finalized, it's time to break down the 2019 NFL Draft prospect rankings. Before we dive into the prospect rankings video, let's take a look at how we go about grading these guys on film.
For the skill positions, we take a look at a prospect's best and worst games statistically and the best matchup before we finalize his film grade. And from there, the player is assigned a grade on a 100-point scale. We don't believe in the term backup per se. If you're the NFL, you're one of the best players at your position, so we consider you a starter in waiting, or at least that's how I would look at it if I'm a GM or a head coach. So without further ado, let's dive into the video with our number one graded prospect at the position. Darryl Henderson out of Memphis graded out as a top running back in the draft class after going for over 1,900 yards with 22 rushing touchdowns, and the most impressive number was his 8.9 yards a carry. He's a legit home run waiting to happen, and one of the few backs that keeps you on the edge of your seat with each and every carry that he gets. His game and level of explosiveness and suddenness is very similar to the Minnesota Vikings running back Dalvin Cook. Henderson, in my opinion, is going to be a star at the next level. Coming in at RB2 was Josh Jacobs out of Alabama. Despite not having feature back touches in film, Jacobs was able to put together enough out there on tape to warrant this grade from me. I'm big on backs who are able to either hit the home run or make people miss. Jacobs is more of the latter, which is exactly what you need as a back to supersede any blocking that's gone awry. Jacobs may not have the pure home run hitting speed as others in his class, but he has the good all-around game to be a very productive pro. Looking at the rest of our top 10, and you can definitely see some home run hitters that are represented here, like Notre Dame's Dexter Williams and Stanford's Bryce Love. Williams was able to put together a fantastic year as a full-time starter, while Love, in my opinion, was one of the more forgotten about backs in the country. He is going to be a good RB2 as a pro. Mike Weber of Ohio State, Devin Singletary of Florida Atlantic, and Damian Harris out of Alabama are guys that I view as capable RB1s that'll grow into that role, but will initially make their marks as RB2s early on. And I'm a big fan of the physical nature of backs 8 through 10. These are players I like to call your volume guys that get better with each and every carry, and ones that can close out games. And many people are sleeping on the skills of both Alex Barnes out of Kansas State and Darren Hall out of Pitt. Barnes reminds me a lot of Steelers running back James Conner, while Hall reminds me a lot of Jeremy Hill. Both guys have the above average footwork and a good balance for a couple of taller backs. One player I've gotten to see a lot of over the last 2 seasons, covering a lot of East Stroudsburg's games and calling a lot of their games, was J-Mart Anderson. The 6'2", 225-pound tailback reminds me a lot of former Packers running back James Starks and a little bit of the Toronto Argonauts tailback James Wilder Jr. He's a taller back that runs with really good body lean, and although he wasn't asked to catch a lot of passes with the Warriors, he is solid in that part of his game as well. He's a very good athlete with vision and power that is able to have success as either a complimentary guy or a full-time feature back at the next level. As we take a look at the backs 11 through 20, there are guys that are very similar in style from a vision and elusiveness standpoint. Miles Sanders out of Penn State, David Montgomery from Iowa State, and Travion Williams out of Texas A&M all embody those attributes. Bruce Anderson of North Dakota State has above average burst to be able to hit those chunk plays, those 30 to 40 yard gainers at the NFL level. He has a certain fluidness about his game that's special in my opinion. And I came away more impressed with Elijah Holyfield out of Georgia and Kadri Allison out of Pitt, and also Jordan Scarlett of Florida when I got a chance to study their film. They do not waste any time getting downhill, and they were able to show enough quickness to freeze the defender at the second level and keep it moving. And despite the ankle injury, Jalen Moore of Appalachian State is a fantastic pro prospect. He runs with an explosive purpose and possesses great balance to fly through arm tackles as well. You just hope that the injury doesn't affect him any further than what it did this past season, and he doesn't lose any of those two things moving forward. One sleeper to keep an eye on is Xavier Turner from Tarleton State. He jumped onto my radar while I was at the College Gridiron Showcase this past January in Fort Worth, Texas, putting together a strong week of work in front of over 140 NFL scouts. When I went to study the film, I saw a compactly built runner who was very tough to bring down. He definitely carries at 233 pounds very well and has above average speed to go along with it. He was a feature back for the Texans and could handle that role at the professional level, in my opinion. One of the better contact balanced runners you'll see in his draft class. Two more runners from the great state of Texas are incarnate words Raekwon Dickens and Texas Wesley's Desmond Nisby. Dickens has game that's very similar to the 49ers back Jeffrey Wilson in the sense that he's a slasher with the ability to flip the field position in an instant with his blistering speed. Dickens was also big in the big games this year for the Cardinals against New Mexico. He ran for 110 yards on 7 carries, including a 90-yard touchdown run, and followed that up the following week with a 139-yard effort against North Texas. He hit pay dirt 14 times last season and definitely has a place at the next level. Desmond Nisby was a player that I had no clue about until I sat down with his head coach Joe Prudhomme back at Texas Wesleyan in January for an interview. He suggested that I take a look at his 6'3", 225-pound senior tailback that no one's talking about. It didn't take long for me to become a fan of his game. Nisby, who began his career at Texas Tech, where he was then a 250-pound bruiser, chiseled his frame up to about 225 and didn't lose any of that power that he had out there in Lubbock, but gained more foot quickness within his game. He's a deep sleeper in this class, but one who has served the role as a short yardage goal line back, but also with tape now that he has put together the last 2 seasons at Texas Wesleyan, he was able to prove that he can be much more than that at the next level. Here are backs 21 through 30, and we've already spoken about Dickens and Nisby. Rodney Anderson of Oklahoma's game and situation reminds me a lot of former Minnesota Vikings great Robert Smith. He had a lot of the same injury concerns coming out of Ohio State, but when he was healthy, he was a legit game breaker. Anderson, to me, is cut from the same cloth. I hope his injuries are behind him and he can have a very long and productive career. And this list also features some good slashers in the backfield like Wagner's Ryan Foles, who is also a very good downfield threat as a receiver. Marquise Young of UMass, who had a really good week at the East-West Shrine game, along with Ty Johnson out of Maryland. No one is talking about Georgia Southern's tailback Wesley Fields. If you remember, Fields burst onto the scene as a true freshman in the GoDaddy Bowl, showcasing that home run hitting capability that you look for in the tailback. So it's easy to see that, or say that, he can be just like Jerick McKinnon, who plays for San Francisco. And I don't think you'd be wrong in that assessment. Where I think he has a bit of an advantage over McKinnon as a prospect is in the balance department. Fields has that ability, along with his ability to take it the distance. That combination is a deadly one, and one that makes him a threat in the backfield. Gregg Reynolds of Kutztown is a different type of a threat. He's the type that can affect the game as a runner, as a receiver, and also as a returner. Reynolds was a stud in the PSAC throughout his career and doesn't need much to have an impact on game day. I think initially, as a core special teamer, is how he'll get his feet wet before becoming more integrated into the regular offense. I like to see him get paired with a creative offensive coordinator that can realize and recognize his wide array of skills and find ways to get him involved. As we move on to backs 31 through 40, another PSAC guy in West Hills out of Slippery Rock makes the list. He had a stellar week of work at not only the NFLPA game, but also the Senior Bowl. One of the better conferences in college football, just continues to pump out the pro prospects. Isaiah Johnson and John Santiago are tremendous receivers out of the backfield that are also dynamic returnmen, and you can appreciate the workmanlike effort from backs like Benny Snell of Kentucky and Jordan Ellis out of Virginia. I can easily see a pro coach viewing them as starters because of how consistent and tough they are to bring down. Cedric Ware out of USC is a prospect who still has a ton of upside left in his game and has a bit of Damian Wilson to his game as well from a traits perspective. Marquell Cartwright out of North Carolina A&T had the tough task of stepping in for a legend into Rick Cohen, but the 5'8", 208-pounder definitely carved out his own legacy with the Aggies. I was at the 2017 Celebration Bowl against Grambling, and he was extremely tough to bring down. He's not as explosive as Devonta Freeman of the Atlanta Falcons, but runs with the same level of determination and grit. He is the type of back that can maintain his speed and quickness throughout the play, leaving a bunch of broken arms and ankles in his wake. Don Bragalone of Lehigh checks in at number 41 on our list. The 5'10", 230-pound tailback ran for over 1,000 yards 3 straight seasons before being held back by nagging injuries and a lot of other issues this year as a senior, but Bragalone has the power, the speed, the balance along significant carries as a pro, and also is a really good receiver out of the backfield. In my opinion, he's a fantastic player. And speaking of fantastic players, so is Myles Gaskin of Washington. highly productive players at Power 5 programs will always have a place in the NFL. He's a shifty runner who's able to pick and slide his way through traffic really well. I like Emmanuel Jones of Concordia St. Paul as well because of those same things. He's also a very good downfield threat in a passing game and not afraid to get his nose in there and stick it in the face of an oncoming blitzer. We're starting to see the return of the big backs, and I absolutely love it. Bethel University tailback Tay Davis at 6'3", 250 plays a lot like former Raiders tailback Michael Bush. You routinely saw Davis break away from 4 big games on film. I think he could eventually end up in some sort of H-back role, having the ability to both block and catch really well. But my inner Spike Dykes and Chuck Knox will want to feed the big back the ball 25 to 30 times a game and watch him slowly break the will of would-be tacklers. But in all seriousness, Davis has pro game in my opinion. So does guys like Joe Prothero, who is the B-back in the Cal Poly Mustang option attack. He's another one that's very similar to Davis that could find themselves in more of a fullback H-back role as a pro. Marquise Terry out of Southeast Missouri State has explosive speed and quickness tailor-made for a third down role or return role initially in the NFL. And I'm sorry about the graphic error, but Bernard McDonald out of CSU Pueblo is 5'10", 215, not the 6'4" that you see listed here on our graphic. Cedric Battle of Central Arkansas is a Dexter McCluster type that can easily make a full-time transition to receiver if he wanted to. You can probably say the same thing for James Williams out of Washington State as well, who catches the ball extremely well out of the backfield. Stony Brook has 2 backs in Donald Leontine and Jordan Gowans that are really good players who are well coached out there on Long Island by running backs coach Omar King, who's one of the best in the business. LIU post Malik Pierre should be an immediate impact player in the return game. As we're getting close to rounding out the rankings, there are still a bevy of good backs that are available to do multiple things, like Charlie Volker of Princeton, who's a legit home run threat, who is also on the Princeton Tigers track team. And I think AJ Ollett of Ohio is being criminally underrated. It's hard to be that productive when teams know that you are the main option and still are able to have success. Ryan Ross out of McNeese State is another sleeper back from that program who does a lot of things really well, especially catching the football. And Bryce Allen of Delaware State is one tough SOB that was able to handle feature back carries for the Hornets throughout his career and is also a fantastic player in blitz pickup in my opinion. Taz Lindsay out of Charleston Southern, like Cedric Battle, can easily play receiver as a pro if he wanted to. He's that type of athlete and that type of ball player. And not to leave out the fullbacks, Wisconsin's Alec Ingold graded out as the best in the class and is coming off a great week down in Mobile at the Reese's Senior Bowl.
So that's a wrap here from the Football Game Plan Studios. I'm Emory Hunt, the czar of the playbook. Be sure to follow me on all of my social media accounts. And don't forget to check out and subscribe on iTunes to Football Game Plan Podcast. We can find our Scout Team podcast, which has a lot of 2019 NFL Draft prospect interviews. And also be sure to subscribe on YouTube to the Football Game Plan Network, located at youtube.com/footballgameplan.